are you in for SFB?
Archer.
Oh, okay, gotcha. And which one are you in, Adam?
Rick and Morty.
Got it. Okay.
All right, ready when you are, Chris.
All right.
Let's do this thing. And you got time, Chris.
Okay.
So whenever you think we need to wrap it up, it's on you.
Why is it always on me?
Because I'm awful at it. I think our only long episode, I'm pretty sure that I was supposed to see if it was getting too long. I believe that was with Tyler.
So just give me a second so I can plug my headset in just so that I got power going to it so it doesn't die on me.
Sure. Hello? Okay, there it goes. All right. No, that's not the one. That's the one I want. All right. I haven't even checked. I haven't checked the site yet to see what picture or not picture, what draft position I'm in.
Oh, I'm 7. I hate my spot.
I don't want to pick middle. I definitely do not want to pick towards the middle.
No, that's trash. Also, to our one viewer, we're about to get started.
I got a bunch of back now. That's not good.
Because of the plugged in.
Yeah.
Let me go check.
Who we got? Is it Spoonie? Or maybe it's Outhouse?
Oops.
Yeah.
Oh, that's SFB7. Oops.
Oops.
My leagues. What we get?
Oh, yeah. Viewers coming in hot.
We got viewers?
We got viewers.
All right, I'm gonna have to take this off. I'm gonna have to risk it, and hopefully it doesn't.
We'll just stop if you can't hear us. Just let us know. We can stop and pick back up where we left off. No worries.
Yeah, we'll figure it out. It should hold up. We're going an hour. It should hold up.
All right, cool. Whenever you're ready, Chris.
All righty. I'm 9th. All right, now let me get rid of this before I stare at this all night.
That's not a bad spot.
Nah, it's not too hateful. I wish I was closer to one of the ends though. But all right, let's get this thing rolling. So when I click record, there we go. All right, you guys ready? And for do we got one listener on YouTube?
3. We have 3, my dude.
My goodness, like we are popping out here in these streets this evening on Friday night. All right, well let's get this thing going.
Let's do it.
All right, everybody, welcome back. This is episode 12, if I'm not mistaken, of the Dynasty Owners Manual podcast. I'm your host, Chris Allen, and with us tonight is the man, the myth, the legend, Leo Siga, and Leo, you're going to have to, and we're going to get into this here shortly, but this notebook, man, I can't tell you how many folks I've seen talk about the notebook and not the movie, but your actual notebook, and just trying to get an idea or an understanding of how in-depth this thing goes in terms of player notes, or not just player notes, but like owner notes, and how deep this thing goes. So I'm really excited to get into it with you tonight. So first off the top, we wanted to say thank you for coming on to the show with us tonight, and also find out how you're doing.
Well, I'm doing great. Thanks for asking. And it's really good to be with you guys today. I am kind of a podcast recluse, right? I don't do many of these, but it was nice to get the invite and nice to come on and do some notebook talking. The notebook started a really long time ago because I'm a really old guy. So it started, back in the late 80s, and it started with a redraft league, a local redraft league that I was in. And, it was a small redraft league. We only had 10 guys. Back then it wasn't, fantasy football wasn't super popular. It was back in the days where you used the Monday edition of the USA Today for tabulating all your stats. There was a lot more crap talking back then because, it was a small group and it was live, but a little different than online. But But anyway, so the reason the whole notebook started, it started because of positional runs. That's what really made it take off for me, was because I realized that this group of guys, these 9 other owners, would take quarterbacks really early. Back then, late round quarterback wasn't really a thing. These guys would take quarterbacks really early. And you know, I would go in with a notebook and I would start tracking all of their picks, not just mine, but their picks. You know, I would have a plot where I would have their starting quarterback, their running backs, their wide receivers, and I would just start charting and plotting their picks in. So I knew once that they had already picked their starting quarterbacks, because it was a small bench league. I mean, I think we had a few starters and we only had like 5 or 6 bench guys. So nobody was really taking a second quarterback. So once I knew everybody had their starting quarterbacks, I could wait. I could wait till the very last pick of the draft if I wanted to, and know that I was still going to get a quality player at that position. So that's how it all started. I started realizing that 4 out of these guys would take a quarterback with their first pick every single year. Another 2 guys wouldn't get past round 3 without taking one, to start logging all that down. And then from there, you know, it morphed into a much more detailed beast, but that's what really got the ball rolling.
That is amazing. I mean, to me, it sounds like you were cataloging all of these moves back before any of that information was something that I would say folks want to do right now, or sites might even, I don't even think sites offer to do that stuff nowadays. So that's amazing that just thinking about the, you know, getting that edge and things that we discuss just on the, I mean, from a high level that owners discuss even from a weekly standpoint. That's really interesting. That's something you you started doing. Depending on which year you started, that might have been before I was born. So, my goodness. So
thanks for that.
I mean, that is amazing, man. So let me flip it over right now to my partner in crime, Adam, because I know he has some questions about it. But first, as I always ask, Adam, how you doing, man? I noticed the new hat. What's that got? Does that have to do with fantasy football? I have to ask.
No, but I don't think I'll ever do a YouTube live without my Capitals hat again. Look, DC is not going to win a championship for quite some time, so I need to bask in it a little. And I'm just really excited to have Leo. I've been excited for this one since we booked it. And Leo, I'm just really curious, what kind of book is it? I'm kind of a school supplies nerd.
So honestly, and I'll get into more detail as we break it down, but I always use a 3-ring binder. It doesn't really matter whichever one's on sale, because I want to be able to add and subtract pages, and that's the easiest way to go at it.
Nice. I was thinking marble journal.
There you go. But I guess, but now that you happen to mention that, so is that just something that for each year you have a separate notebook, and then you start a new notebook each year, or is it something that you just continue to compile notes until it's filled up and then you just roll on to the next one?
So basically what I do is I break it down with a notebook for each league. So, and that way I can expand, you know, just every year. I do it by owner. So to give you a quick walk through what I do is, right, I get a 3-ring binder and I break it down into 12 sections, because I want to have a section on myself, because I think it's a key component to fantasy football strategy to know what your tendencies are. You may think you know, but until you actually see it on paper, you really don't. So I like to always track myself. So I'll break it into 12 sections, 1 per owner. And then within those 12 sections, I break it down into 5 more sections. I break it down. I've got a section on completed trades, not just my own, but I do a section on any trade in the league, because I want to know, you know, the idea behind that is, you know, is there a potential owner that's always selling draft picks? Is there a potential owner that's always selling off veterans when they get to 28 years old? Is there a potential owner that's always looking to buy aging vets? Because I want to know what door to knock on first. I want to know where to generate trade talk. So I'll have a section on the completed trade. I'll have a section on negotiations that take place with that owner, because I want to know, you know, was it generated through email? Was it something that was generated through trade bait? Was it something that they got put off really quick if I asked a question? Sometimes, you know, you go at an owner and you make a suggestion. Hey, you know, our rosters seem to match up a little bit. Do you want to try to pursue putting a deal together, and it can go off the rails real quick depending on the owner, because you went out and approached them and they didn't like your initial evaluation. That's something that you need to know, because maybe you're just better off sending an offer without opening dialogue. Maybe you're better off getting a trade done if you open up the dialogue first without actually sending an offer. Those are things that I want to catalog, so when I go to deal with that owner, I know how they like to be approached.
So this isn't necessarily just I would say analytical data. So we're not talking about just draft picks. We're not talking about just a draft position or like where or ADP. You're talking about specifics, almost down to, well, this person prefers to be contacted via this way, or if they like to be approached via this particular method, or they do like to be approached prior to sending an offer versus just cold calling them or just sending them an offer right off the bat. I mean, you get really in depth when it comes to this stuff, and this has been since the beginning. This is how you've done this.
Well, it's morphed into this, right? I mean,
Okay.
It changes every year when something new. I'll give you an example. It's a little further along with what I do, but social media is a change in how I track things, because that wasn't really a factor in fantasy football, 10 years ago, 8 years ago. So that's been an addition. But I think it's just important. I mean, certain owners, that you guys probably know this from playing in my fantasy league, right? Certain owners, they'll use trade bait. I'm not a big fan of trade bait, because generally it's somebody selling a jigsaw puzzle that's 5 pieces short of a puzzle. You're usually getting garbage. But some guys really swear by trade bait. And you're going to have some folks that if you make an offer to them, they'll go to the chat or to the message board and they'll say, hey, I wasn't thinking of selling Le'Veon Bell before, but now that Leo sent me an offer, let me see what I can get from the rest of the league. There's certain owners I know that do that. So that's something I want to know, because I have to realize that once I initiate trade dialogue with this person, chances are he's putting it out to the whole league. So I need to go aggressive and try to get it wrapped up before that happens. So then, you talked about, analytical aspect of it. I do track draft picks. I think that's huge, because you need to know if there's an owner in the league who evaluates talent the same way you do. You need to know if there's an owner in the league that drafts positionally, has more comfort in understanding a position. I have one owner in the league that really knows how to evaluate rookie running backs. That's his comfort zone. Doesn't matter if there's a really good wide receiver on the board. He's more comfortable drafting running backs. I've got another owner in a league that evaluates talent the same way I do. And if I am not aggressive enough to get in front of him, I'm going to lose my target to him every single time if we're close, if we're within 3 picks of each other. I wanted Lamar Jackson in one particular league that we're in. I had the 2-6. I thought I was safe with the 2-6 because it's a 1-quarterback league. I looked and saw he was 2 picks in front of me. I tried desperately to get in front of him, and sure enough, at 2-4, he took Lamar Jackson. So it didn't, even though I knew it didn't help me, because I couldn't find a trade partner to jump in front of him. Blind bids, I'm not really super aggressive on tracking. It's only when I notice something out of the ordinary, like when blind bids first open up, if there's a particular owner that'll blow their whole budget on a player right off the bat. That's something I'll catalog. But I don't necessarily, target and track every single $2 bid, because I think that's just, there's not a lot of data to be gleaned from that information. So it's more or less the big heavy hits that I really want to track. Is somebody jump right away? Does somebody hold their budget every year to the very end? That type of stuff I'll track. And then the last that I've been tracking now is their social media presence. I kind of talked about a little earlier, because that's new. And it's a huge component to understanding the owners in your league. My fantasy league kind of changed things up, because it used to be where you could track an owner in your league by their email. You could just plop their email address into the bar, and you could see every single league that they were in. So you were able to go through and say that they have a favorite player. I'm only in one league with this guy, but let me check his 5 other squads. Does he own Antonio Brown on every single team? Well, that aspect has kind of been taken away. And certainly you can have burner accounts on Twitter where, you don't really know who the person is. But for the most part, not to belabor the issue, but for the most part, what I found is what I do now is I really look at podcasts. And a particular person that's talking up, say, Sammy Watkins, he's a buy, go get him. And all of a sudden I got, 3 offers for Sammy Watkins, or then all of a sudden I know, okay, well, there's a good chance now that this person subscribes to that podcast. because they're generating off of that, especially if it's an obscure player. You know, if it's not somebody that, you know, 10 podcasts are talking about, if it happens to be you guys, or if it happens to be, you know, Dynasty Blueprint, or if it happens to be Matt Kelly, and all of a sudden they talk about, you know, going after Gio Bernard or going after a particular player that's a little deeper, and all of a sudden I get offers for that from a particular owner, now I can make the connection, and it's something I start to track.
So, Leo, we're all about practical application here, so we want to be able to put it into terms that other people can use. I just want to know, is there a player that you were able to acquire largely in part due to what you've researched in your notebook?
Yeah, not necessarily so much a player, but I'll give you an example. I play in one particular Devy league, and there's an owner in that league that is especially skilled at evaluating talent at a very young age. He is able to acquire incoming freshmen that blossom, and he just picks them off so early. And I've got a lot of respect for his ability to do that. But what he does also do is he gets extremely impatient. And it's something that I've been able to pick out over time just from watching trades that he's made. And for the last few years, I've basically used him as a farm system, because he's getting those players as freshmen coming in, and by their sophomore year, he's already frustrated with having waited 2 years and doesn't want to wait for them to, you know, declare after their junior season. So I'll make him an offer of players that are producing at this given moment. And I was able to get Barkley that way, and I was able to get Dalvin Cook that way before they declared, because he had gotten tired of them sitting on his bench.
Wow, and especially in those cases, it seems like that'd be, I guess, very advantageous for you to have that. And so a separate question that I have, just surrounding the whole notebook and its quote-unquote mythology from what I've seen on social media, at what point did it start to get out that folks knew that you had this? Like, was it something that you would just tell them straight up, like, hey, according to this trade that I saw you do a couple of years ago, you valued this person that way, and then folks started to get an understanding that you were actually doing this? Or was this just something that, you know, people just kind of, I guess, through being in many leagues with you, they started to understand that you had this information in front of you? Like, did you just tell people, or they just know?
I think it's a combination of both. I think my social media presence, I've talked about it quite a bit. So some people, though, don't even make the connection. It's like I had one owner this past, you know, a couple of weeks ago basically say, "Oh, really? You're on Twitter?" Like, they had no idea. But so it's been a combination of both. And I'll be, you know, as upfront as I can with most of the owners, because what I found is that you want to have a level of transparency and a level of candor with your league mates. You know, I never go out on Twitter and try to puff up a particular player because I'm trying to sell them, or because you know, or talk down a player because I'm trying to buy them. I try to be really transparent with the other owners in my league, be really upfront with them, try to have open dialogue. You know, that's something that I think is so crucial to being able to understand the other owners in your league. Is even league chat leads to learning more things about these guys. You know, they can talk about maybe about where they're from, right? And then all of a sudden they have a particular favorite team, and maybe that leads to them wanting a particular player. In one draft this past week, I had a rookie draft, and I took Gallup for the Cowboys a little earlier than I wanted to, because I know I have 2 diehard Cowboy fans in this league. And I'm hoping that after a big game early on in the season, I'll be able to flip them. It's a risk, but it's a calculated risk based on information I've gotten from these guys. So again, I try to be upfront. I don't try to hide anything from them. You know, I've never had anybody get mad at me, because it's not like I'm tracking personal information. I'm just tracking information based on what they do in this league. And it's something I enjoy. I think the key to fantasy football, and we'll get into this probably a little later when we talk analytics, is that, you know, do what you enjoy. I'm not an analytics guy. I'm more of a relationship person with my league mates, and I'm a film guy. Those are the things that I enjoy. I know I need to add those other aspects to my game to be good, but I do what I enjoy. And tracking other people and profiling and gaining that information, that's part of the hobby to me that's fun.
Absolutely. And I think that you touched upon a couple of points there that I can remember actually going back to our very first episode with Carl Safchik, and I would encourage folks to go back and listen to it, in that you mentioned going just creating relationships with people in terms of how you get information about your league. And I think both Carl and Adam during that episode, they discussed doing just that, in that you can learn so much from just talking to somebody about how they value a player, that it can give you, I wouldn't say 100% of the information that you need, but enough to put you in a range of how they view a player and how much you can not necessarily extract from them, but later on down the line, how you can make trades with them. And I think in that, I guess along those same lines, I mean, do you think that as you continue to catalog information about folks, you go from league to league, is it something that do you seek out a person? I mean, do you want to join leagues with folks that you've already cataloged or been in leagues with prior that you have information on? Or do you also enjoy the getting to know more people, getting to, find out more information about them as you go along?
Yeah, so I've kind of reached a max. I was at a point where I was in like 36 Dynasty leagues at one point, and that's just too many.
Yeah.
And so I've really scaled back. I think I'm down to like 20 now total. And what I found was that initially, you're right, I thought it would be easier to just be in leagues where I do play in a few leagues where it's repeat owners. So that is helpful. But since I enjoy it, I found that when I sought out if I sought out the same owners again, some of the enjoyment was gone because it wasn't somebody new to gain information on. I'd already had a lot of it. So what I found was that I kind of liked the new aspect, and the more diversity and differences in the leagues that I'm in, the more I enjoy tracking that information. So now I'm at a point where I really like it when it's a new owner. I know nothing about that owner because that's a relationship to foster and to get data from. So to me, that's enjoyable. The one thing I would add too during this conversation is I get asked a lot, how would I start? Like, it sounds overwhelming, the amount of information that you collect. How would I go about doing that?
Absolutely.
And my advice to anybody who's asked me that question is start with one league. Just pick one league, whatever league you're working on the most, whatever league you enjoy the most, whether it's your best team or it's a rebuild, whatever team you find yourself spending the most time with, pick that team and then start slowly. Go back the last couple of years, because my fantasy league has that data saved, especially most of the guys that I talk to play in my fantasy leagues. I think ESPN and Yahoo, Flea Flicker, I think they all probably do the same thing. But go back and look at the last couple of years at the draft picks. Go back and look at the last couple of years of the trades and just start to kind of document things that stick out to you. You don't have to document everything. And then as you start to see patterns develop, then you be the judge. Was it worth the time investment? Did I get enough? Was the juice worth the squeeze? I've heard people say before, did I get enough information from what I did? And if the answer is yes, and you had a good time doing it, then expand out. If the answer is no, then there's no reason to be locked into doing it. But I think if you pick one league, go back to do that one league and give it a shot, you'll be amazed at the amount of information you can get just from draft picks and from trades, looking back at a 2-3 year window.
And as you teach us about this, it brings me back to something that I've been doing naturally, but without the notebook. And I often almost find a friend in this way. In many of my leagues, if you've followed me in any capacity this offseason, you probably know I try to win now pretty early on. If I'm starting up, I'm usually trying to win now, and I'm trying to pay for the next few years. Well, we're going to get into productive struggle in just a minute, and there are a lot of people that still follow that. So why wouldn't I partner up with the productive struggle guy who got good value somewhere in the draft that doesn't fit the productive struggle? I might have somebody that I got good value on that does fit the productive struggle, and often we end up making each other's teams. In one of my leagues, we made each other's teams. Essentially, he was a rebuild and I was trying to win the championship. I came in second place and he came in third. So he probably hit on a lot of those trades when he was trying to rebuild. But we had a good read on each other and we got trades done fast. They made sense for our teams, and a notebook would have been very helpful in tracking that. So to move past the notebook just a little bit, we've talked about how we've acquired information throughout the league, but what you still need to do is create a winning roster. You have to be making the right trades, even though you're getting trades done probably more efficiently. So let's talk about roster construction a little. I know in following you used to do something similar to the productive struggle that Ryan McDowell likes to reference. What are you doing nowadays?
So I like I said earlier, I haven't done a ton of startups lately because I've been trying to limit the amount of leagues that I add. Certainly because, again, it went to 30-something leagues, so I've tried to scale back. But in the last couple of years, I've added 3 total. I added 2 back in 2016, and I added 1 this year. What I found is in 2016, it was a learning experience for me because I'd always done the progressive struggle type draft where I always punted year 1. I was very comfortable with it. I was good at it. I would punt year 1. I would invest in enough young upside talent. And I know upside is a term overused and beaten to death, but I would grab enough of it that I would feel comfortable with my squad. I would punt the first year. I would acquire draft picks, and I would have a good opportunity to win in years 2 and 3. If not 2, generally by year 3, I was in a position to win the league title. And what I found in 2016 was that so many people do that now that there's I hadn't done a startup in a while. So I found that so many people chase that young talent that you're always reaching every single round. You're reaching for a guy that doesn't fit that ADP because you've got to get younger, you've got to get more upside, and the value that's on the board is aging veterans, productive aging veterans, but you don't want to draft that 28-year-old AJ Green in the 3rd round or 2nd round. You want to try to reach for a younger guy, and it didn't work for me in 2016. I found myself having to revamp my whole strategy to be competitive. So going into 2017 to the startup I did this year, I said, you know what, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that all these aging veterans are falling, and I'm going to just go ahead and build the most productive team for year 1 that I can build and have a 2-year window now where I win, and then I'll worry about rebuilding down the road.
So in abandoning that productive struggle, you hit the nail on the head on why I do what I do in the startups I'm in, and I'm in a lot of startups this year because I had to drop my original Dynasty league. So that's why I'm doing so many startups now, and I'm at the point where I'm able to acquire Antonio Brown, Julio Jones, and AJ Green in the first 3 rounds of a super flex, but it seems insane to me that you're able to roster these 3 receivers, and it's for the exact reason that you said. It's people really, really get scared of those ages, and guys like Julio, AJ, and AB, they might make it to 35. They might be doing the whole Larry Fitzgerald thing. So there's value to be had. But the question I've been asking many, many weeks now, because this is something that worries me, when you draft a team on value at age, or you start converting your rebuild to an older team, how do you continue winning after you win your championship?
So I think the key, there's a couple things that you can do. I think the idea of acquiring 1st-round draft picks more than a year out, if you're able to do that, is a good strategy, because you're getting them everybody gets caught up in this upcoming draft, right? Everybody, especially as we get closer to draft time, everybody wants that 1st-round rookie draft. A lot of times you can trade your late 1st-round pick. So if you've built a team on productive veterans, chances are you're chasing a title. Your draft pick's going to be a little later. So maybe you can convert that 110, 111, 112, target a team that isn't likely to finish in the top bottom half of the draft, the following year. Target that team and try to flip your late 1st-rounder for an early 1st-rounder. Just push it out a year. That'll put you in a position to add some stronger youth to your team as it's scaling off. The other component to that is you'd always need to churn the bottom part of your roster. You always have to search the waiver wire. You always have to be looking for that guy that maybe didn't start the season off as even in the conversation for carries, but by week 5, week 6, all of a sudden now you've got a Peyton Barber that's come out of the woodwork that's all of a sudden fighting for carries. And in week 1, he wasn't really in the discussion. So you want to add those guys because you can either plug them into your lineup a year or two down the road, maybe, or you can flip them as they perform, and you can add a different target that you'd rather have, or a potential draft pick. Even you can package 2 seconds for a first. You got to be creative, but you've always got to mine the waiver wire, and you've always got to look to acquire first-round picks a year out. And if you can do that, that'll help blend your roster and make it the transition a little easier as your players fall off the cliff.
And that's great information. We had that discussion a little bit off air where I was talking about later in the draft when I've got a solid starting lineup and solid depth, then I'm starting to look for guys that I could see flipping for maybe a 19th second in the foreseeable future. But let's take a break just for a second and talk about our buddy Addison Hayes. He just made the FF Statistics Twitter, so if you're not following that, definitely go check it out. And if you're not using the website, you're really doing yourself a disservice. But we like to do a FF Statistics trivia once a week. So I'm going to be a player, and I'm going to tell you all about myself. Both Chris and Leo are participating. Let me know who I am, all right? You guys got it?
All right. Let's see how we do here.
All right. Despite producing only one wide receiver one since joining the league, I've finished as a top 5 quarterback 5 times in my career. Who am I?
Russell Wilson.
Nope. I think he has more wide receiver one finishes.
Can I get a hint? Like, what year was he drafted?
2011, I believe.
2011?
Oh, man. It's on the tip of your tongue, I can tell. He rips his shirt every time he scores a touchdown.
Oh, Cam.
Cam Newton.
Yeah.
That is correct. All right, Leo, back on topic.
So
go ahead.
One last thing to say, too, when you're talking about what else to do. The other thing when you're talking about the turning those aging rosters over, you always got to take advantage of a hot selling window. That was something that popped into my head while we were talking, right? It's easy to get caught up with a hot selling window. And if your player is performing super well, you want to keep that player, right? Like if all of a sudden maybe AJ Green he's having 3 monster games in a row and you want to ride that. But if that's your window now, all of a sudden there's league-wide interest in a 28, 29-year-old wide receiver, and you've got enough depth to sustain that. You've got enough older vets on your team that are still producing that you can absorb that. Take advantage of that hot window. You've got to be able to separate yourself, and you've got to be able to say, this is my time to cash out. Take advantage of it. You can't be greedy and say, the hell with it, I'm just going to run it and let them go into the ground. Take advantage of that window, because that will help you transition your roster over as well.
And earlier you discussed analytics just a little bit. So we often argue with our buddy Jake and Jake Anderson and Peter Howard. Actually, we get them arguing about analytics and about film. And we've had them both on the show, great guests, and they go back and forth on Dynasty Crossroads every week. What side of the fence do you stand on, and what resources do you use for whatever side you stand on?
So I'm definitely a film guy because it's what I enjoy. But at the same time, I understand that I have to be balanced. I think it's a perfect marriage between film and analytics. I don't think you can have too much of one. You need them both. You need to be able to watch film. I think film's very important from a standpoint that it makes you a better dynasty player, because you need to have a baseline when you watch these rookies come into the league. And I think it's super important that you're able to come up with your own baseline so that you can gauge it against a couple other voices. One of the problems we get caught up with in fantasy football is there's so many folks with megaphones, soapboxes, podiums, you follow one player over the course of a week on Twitter, and there's 15 sell articles, 15 buy articles on the same player. You've got to be able to have your own eval on that player so you're comfortable with that. So I think film, like I said, especially with rookies, film is so important. But at the same time, know your weaknesses. I know I'm not a stat guy. I look at some of these guys like Addison, and here they are working with these Excel sheets, and they're putting in macros and pivot tables and all this stuff. I see these graphs come across Twitter. That's just not me. I look at that and I get lost. It's like hieroglyphics, but I know it's important. So I pick out a few solid voices that I really like to listen to, that I really think do a great job explaining not just the end results, but how they got there. Because I think that's a key component. When you're not comfortable with a topic, you need to know how the information, how you reach that final destination. How did you get that number? And there's a few guys out there. Addison is one. He does a fantastic job. That site that he has put together is such an instrumental tool in a lot of what I do now, because I'm not super comfortable, and it's a super easy site to use. And it's free. I can't do better than that. They've done such, like I said, a great job with that. But I think it's important. If you're a stat guy, get comfortable with film. I think Matt Waldman's the RSP film room is huge, because he walks you through, talk about how you get to a certain point. He doesn't just tell you that this particular player is smooth or hits the hole quickly, has good vision. He explains why, breaks it down steps so that you become a film evaluator. The Scouting Academy does the same thing. They'll put clips up where they explain, this is what that running back saw. This was the crease they saw when they pushed the line of scrimmage. Learning those things makes you a better evaluator. So the key is to get comfortable with the things that you're not good at. Make sure you absorb them, and also learn how to digest some film.
Yeah.
So before you get to the next question, Chris, sorry, I just wanted to add in a quick little blurb. So I like Peter Howard and Addison Hayes a lot when it comes to analytics, and I think I've been buddies with both of them because they're amazing. They just spew out the knowledge off the top of their head. And you could argue that there's much, much, much bigger names out there. But what we've been talking about this whole time is trying to exploit weaknesses. If everybody is out there listening to Matt Waldman, for one, it's common knowledge at that point because he created the common knowledge. And then two, you get a different perspective. So I encourage you to go out there and try to find somebody with a different perspective and just interact with them. And that's how I gain all of my analytics knowledge, because I did not come into this having any of that knowledge myself.
And I would say, just on the flip side of that, is that I would say that I'm an analytics person, and that, like, my approach, I mean, just in understanding what both of you guys have both commented on, is that I know film is my weakness, but who have I decided to talk to or lean on the opposite side of the fence in order to get some more information? I mean, I've talked to Jake. I mean, we just had a wonderful conversation with him a couple weeks ago, and where a lot of the criteria that he looks for in all positions, he just kind of laid it out. And those are things that now I'm starting to look for whenever I go to watch film. Like, if I ever get a chance to sit down and watch it, folks like Joe Pano, who's on Twitter, I think his evaluation, the criteria that he uses for looking at either whether it be running backs, wide receivers, I don't think that there's any particular position that he really goes for. But I mean, those are the folks that you should be speaking to, because again, you will find, I mean, most people are looking at Matt Waldman's work. They are looking at Matt Harmon's work when it comes to wide receivers. I mean, a lot of those guys are following the guys with the blue check marks, but you can still get quality information, or at least a different perspective for some of those for some of those other people that we've spoken about. So 100% agree with you guys, and I'm hoping that, or I'm assuming that most of you guys, the folks listening at home, are already speaking to and following all those guys already. So it's a lot of good information that you can have. So turning the page just a little bit, Leo. So we've spoken about the roster construction. So let's say that you've got your completed roster. You're getting into the thick of it. You're now into the season. So how do you actually start to win games with your roster once you've already put it all together? So do you go to a lot of do you find yourself using daily fantasy sites like 4for4? I mentioned that because I write for them. That's just a shameless plug right there. Or the ESPN, Roto World. I mean, do you find yourself utilizing those types of sites, or I mean, anything along the lines of do you like to play DFS or look at any of the DFS content? I mean, are those influences that you see yourself using in order to help you out from a dynasty perspective?
I actually think it's a missing component for a lot of dynasty players, because I think that once you construct that perfect roster, you kind of sit back and just think your roster is going to take care of you for the rest of the way. You've amassed all this talent, you've built your perfect starting lineup, and all you have to do is plug and play. And that's not always the case. I mean, you don't want to overdo it, right, and get crazy and sit Antonio Brown for, third wide receiver on a team. But at the same time, you need to understand matchups. And I think Daily really offers an opportunity to understand what the folks who concentrate on that are looking at. There's certain matchup analytics that really come into play. Particular slot wide receivers benefit greatly playing against this particular slot cornerback. Those are things that are important that a lot of times dynasty players just kind of skim over. Like, I know I'm plugging this guy in, he's part of my starting lineup, that's it. And I think the daily aspect of it is, hey, there's a lot of things that are taken into each individual matchup. And those guys, since they focus on that one particular Sunday, they focus on that one particular game, it's key to get a couple of voices. We talk about singling out certain voices that you trust. And Ryan has that list of fantasy football follows that is out there free for anybody who's out there that and it's broken down into categories. You've got a category for dynasty, you've got a category for daily, for every single thing that's out there. You redraft, and so I would say to anybody who's listening, go to that, get that, and anybody that's on that list, make sure you're following them, and then go through and kind of gauge who you're the most comfortable. How do they present the information so that again, you understand how they're getting there. There's a couple of articles every week that Roto World puts out that are really good. Evan Silva does the matchup column where he talks about what to expect. 4 for 4 is great. Paulson has some great rankings that come out every week. And so those are all important. And then there's, again, a few daily guys that really focus in on what to expect in a particular matchup to exploit. So I think those are all key components to being a better dynasty player. And if you don't take advantage of that, just like if a film guy doesn't take advantage of analytics, or an analytics guy doesn't take advantage of film, you really need to use all the resources that are out there for you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when it comes to, at least from my personal experience, because I come at Dynasty from a redraft perspective, so I understand the players. But I think that when it comes to Dynasty, one thing that I'm trying to understand, or at least try to not necessarily ignore, but at least be cognizant of, is that when it comes to Dynasty, we almost kind of look at things from a 30,000-foot view, because we're looking at players over the long haul. Like, in some players, we want to try and at least understand their value over the course of their career, or if not, maybe the 2 to 3 year window, as some folks like to look at it. But all right, so I've got that player, but now when it comes to week 1 and that player's playing up against, I don't know, insert, incredibly tough defensive matchup here. Now what are we going to do with that player? That player that you traded a 19 first for now has a terrible matchup in week 1. What are you supposed to do with that player? And that's where some of these daily sites, like we just mentioned, or some of these voices in the daily community or redraft community can be of use to you. So when it comes to making tough lineup decisions, I mean, are there some influences, or what influence do you have when you talk about having some of those tough lineup decisions? Do you look at things like some of the Vegas odds that I think Warren Sharp, he likes to lay down a lot of information when it comes to making Vegas odds. I love his charts are like, again, that looks like hieroglyphics to me, some of the charts he puts out. Or do you take anything like weather into account when making tough lineup decisions when it comes to Dynasty?
Yeah, he's a sharp dude, isn't he? Play on words there, right?
Yeah,
he is amazing. So I think the Vegas odd that I really pay attention to is the over and the under, because I want to have an idea of what the odds makers think we're looking at for potential points. That's important, right? If it's going to be a game where they're setting that over under very low, then I don't really want to have too many players going in that game, because they're the ones who are making more money on this than I could ever dream. And they're the ones who are generally right more often than not. So if they're projecting a very high scoring game, I'll make lineup decisions based on that. I'll try to get an extra player in that particular game. try to stack that particular offense with a quarterback wide receiver if I can, or a quarterback running back if I can. So to me, that's important. Weather comes into play for me when we're talking about quarterbacks. That's really the only thing that I worry about, and it's wind. I don't even worry about rain so much. Is when we start getting really high winds, that's something I take into account. I did learn my lesson the hard way, and I went back and looked this up because I wanted to get it right, because I learned a lesson back in 2008, and it was a very difficult lesson to learn on weather. So it was in the title game, and so it was week 16, and I had Ben Roethlisberger on my team, and they were going up against the Titans. And it was at home, and they had a forecast of 30-mile-an-hour winds for that game with gusts up to 45. And I was very concerned about Ben in that weather. Now, my backup quarterback at that time was Dan Orslowski for the Lions. And he was coming off a very nice performance the week before where he threw for almost 300 yards and I think 2 scores. So I felt comfortable. They were playing the Saints at home. And I felt the Saints had the worst passing defense in the league that year, and I was very comfortable that I would be able to slide Orlowski in and put Roethlisberger on my bench because I had the matchup that I thought I could win with a very minimal amount of production from my quarterback. I had an edge at every position in this title game. I wanted the highest floor I could have. I wasn't worried about my ceiling. Mm-hmm. So I went with that, and Ben ended up scoring 23 points that game. Did very well, and Orslowski scored 4. So, and I ended up losing by 18. So if I had just stuck with what I knew I should do really and play the better of the 2 quarterbacks, I would have won that game. And it's haunted me since 2008, even though I had to go back and dig up the specifics. That lesson always comes back to the forefront when I'm getting too cute. When I'm trying to make a lineup decision and I'm trying to outsmart myself, I always go back to, well, Einstein, remember what you did back in 2008, and remember it cost you the title. So why don't you just go ahead and do what you know you need to do here? And so I won't go quite so crazy. But to get back to your point, I worry about total points. I worry about weather from the standpoint of wind and a quarterback. But other than that, I really look at matchups. And that's, again, where the daily guys come in, because I really want to try to take advantage of personnel packages. I really, really want to take advantage of offensive line versus defensive line. And I want to take advantage of how wide receivers and cornerbacks are matching up. And is there an opportunity to exploit some individual matchups?
So we've provided some awesome information so far, and it's been great for our rosters that we have now. Let's talk about a roster that we're about to have. The 3 of us have been fortunate enough to have been invited to Scott Fish Bowl. So while we have you, Leo, could you give us a little bit of information on the format, a little bit of draft strategy, and maybe some resources you might have?
So let's talk a little bit about Scott first, okay? Because the amount of effort and energy this guy puts into running this league and running this, it's not even a league, it's an event. It's an industry-wide event.
Countrywide.
It's amazing. And so many folks, what they said, 7,000 people were trying to get into the last slot that was available.
Worldwide even at that point, right?
Yeah. Crazy. So anyway, as far as Scott is one of the most generous, one of the kindest people in the industry. Whether it's his time, whether it's his money, it's just it really is mind blowing to me what this guy does, not just for Fantasy Cares and raising money for Christmas toys for underprivileged kids, for needy kids. Not just that, it's of his time. I had questions early on when I got into this industry, not that I'm putting out a ton of content, but there was a while there where I had my own podcast and I was writing articles and I was really enjoying it. And Scott was so generous with his time, answering questions, just being there for me. You even see it with Fanball now when something happens and there's a glitch, he's the first one on the scene, trying to just make sure everything is comfortable and works well for everybody. The taking of this contest is, again, amazing, and he's so giving of his time. And I just want to say thank you to him for getting this going, for the effort that he puts into it, the endless hours that he puts into it. Tremendous job. And I recommend anybody out there who's listening to this that didn't get in but still wants to make a donation, please go to the website, go to Fantasy Care. It's on Twitter. It's connected to a whole bunch of us out there. Scott's got it on his webpage. Make a donation. You can get shirts. You can just make a contribution. Whatever you can do, it's greatly appreciated. I believe last count we were over $22,000. I think Scott had in his team had gotten together.
He posted. Yeah.
Yeah, I just saw today.
I mean, again, that's amazing. So kudos to him. Well done to his team, and thanks for all particular contest. For those of who don't know, it's multifaceted, multi-league contest where, what is it, 900 altogether, something like that? Owners have teams, duplicate division. So, you're in a division with 11 other owners, but it's, division by division by division by division, and then it ends up funneling down to you have one ultimate champion of this whole thing. And he does the scoring uniquely in this contest so that all the positions are really evened out across the board. Being a super flex, he does a point per first, a particular percentage of points for first downs. For PPR, he adds an increase for tight ends, so that the positions, again, across the board offer so many different strategies for how you build your team. The one thing that I've been preaching, or two things I've been preaching the past 2 weeks, are basically for folks who are kind of new to the contest, because there's a lot of folks who haven't done this before. And the two bits of advice that I can really give out to the folks, and I'm sure you guys can hop on this as well and offer more insight. First, you've got to be super, super fluid in how you read this draft, because every single division for every single draft is different. Some divisions, quarterbacks fly off the board in the first round and a half. Some divisions, they don't come off the board till round 5, round 6. It all really depends, and you've got to get a read for that pretty quickly. And you've got to go in with really no set strategy. You've got to be able to adjust quickly and read your league, see how it's going, and then adjust again accordingly to that. So that's very important. The other thing that's important is don't base your decisions on the mocks, because my experience has been that the mocks, people are generally way more comfortable drafting in a mock than they are in the real thing. And where they'll let certain positions or certain players fall in the mock, they will not let that happen once we get to where it counts. So you've got to be prepared for that. Again, it goes back to reading your league and being able to adjust quickly. And the final thing I'll say is that you kind of really need to get an idea of who you're in your league with. And this goes back to my whole notebooking idea, is kind of understand who your competition is. If you're in a league, a division with a lot of veterans, say you're in with Scott Fish himself, or you're in with Sigmund Bloom, or you're in with Evan Silva or Ryan, or some of these other guys who've done it so many times, chances are there's going to be a little more adherence to the mock ADP, and they're going to be a little more comfortable without getting roped into positional runs. But if you're in a league with a lot of guys who are doing this for their first time, in a division where they don't have a lot of experience, there's going to be some incredible positional runs. There's going to be ADP throw. There's going to be collateral damage everywhere with guys that really haven't done this before. So kind of get an idea who your competition is, who the other 11 guys are in your particular division, and get an idea maybe how that's going to go before you go in ahead of time.
And I'll provide a little bit of what I'm doing, and it sounds really stupid to say out loud, but I'm not doing much is how I'm preparing. And the reason I say that is because you can mock and mock and mock, and then you go in with this golden strategy, but then you're not willing to throw that strategy away, and you're going to have to throw it away. So most dynasty startups, I will prepare and prepare and prepare, and I'll have numerous rankings and numerous projections. I do wish I grabbed a 2018 projection, but besides that, I've purposely avoided the mocks because I don't want to see a team from the 7th spot and then anticipate getting that team again. It's going to be a totally different group of people. Like Leo referred to, specifically the quarterback run. There will be quarterback runs. You can use it to your advantage, or you can just follow the herd. But either way, whatever happened in your mock isn't going to help you with that. So be prepared. Do some thinking, but be also prepared to throw all your preparation away is my tip there.
And I would have to agree with both you guys, because as I was mentioning before we started recording this evening, I've done no mocks up until now. I've been out on vacation for the past week, and I just started looking at some ADP from a few mocks last night. And the one thing that I am doing just to get a feel for, I guess, where certain players are going and just where certain positions are going is that I'm looking at both the ADP data and then also the standard deviation of said ADP data. And I'm just shifting everything up by their standard deviation just to assume that, well, if they're really getting picked around pick 60, but the standard deviation is like 5 or 6 picks, I'll just assume that they're getting picked at like 55 or 54. I'm just assuming everybody's going to get picked earlier, and I won't have a shot at them. So it's good to at least have a feel for the players, or just the players and where they're going. But like both of you guys said, get to know your owners. I mean, I think that's one of the big things that Scott really wants out of the entire tournament to begin with, is that, he wants everybody, throwing up the hashtag SFB8, that he wants you creating those group chats or whatever with all the rest of the other 11 owners in your division, because he wants everybody to get to know each other. I mean, we have in some cases there are some folks where you're in a division with maybe a few people or people you might work with or associate with, but in some cases you might be that fan that gets in with 11 other writers or folks within the industry. And how else are you going to get to know those folks without just talking with them, saying, hey, I'm about to play this weekend, or, good luck to your squad, or, whatever. And also, just like Leo was talking about earlier, how else are you going to get information about how they value players without talking to them? That's one of the big things that's one of the ways that you can find out, well, hey, I'm a fan of this team, or, hey, I saw from a podcast that you did that you're a Green Bay fan. So you're probably going to be taking, they might be talking about taking Aaron Rodgers in at the end of the first round, which is probably going to wind up happening anyway. But it's just things like that, where getting to know your owners and being flexible, not necessarily walking in with, kind of chuck 0 RB and all that other stuff right out the window. Because once you start drafting, you're gonna get caught up in the thick of it, just like everybody else, and just be, I guess, one, have fun, and then two, be flexible and be ready to just adjust to your league as you move on. So that would be kind of echoing your guys' thoughts, but that would be my advice to folks, especially if it's your first year. Just have fun with it. I mean, you're gonna wind up, probably drafting a team that you're going to love it at first, but then you might take a few hits, injuries, bye weeks, all that stuff happens anyway, but just have some fun with it and talk with the rest of folks in your league.
Absolutely. Try not to have division envy, because that's what generally ends up happening, right? You look at your division and you're like, man, I can't believe this is the squad I ended up with. If only I had been in that other division, because all the players I wanted were on the board when I picked, and it would have been perfect. Because I remember going through that last year. I looked at a couple divisions and I was like, how the heck did that person last to round 4? I wanted them in round 3, and somebody took them in my division in round 2. So try not to get hooked up with divisional envy and just enjoy your process.
Oh yeah, and play that waiver wire. I made it to the playoffs last year, I kid you not, because I grabbed Alvin Kamara off the waiver wire. Okay, so that could be you next year. I started out 0-4 to start this season, and I still wound up making to the playoffs off the backs of Alvin Kamara and Alex Collins. Now, when Kamara went down with that concussion, that was pretty much the end of my season after that. But still, that could be you this year. Yeah. So
injuries play such a huge role in deciding who actually wins this thing. Probably more so than any other league out there. I mean, bottom line is you can do well in the regular season. You can just chop through players or other opponents, and you suffer 1 or 2 key injuries coming down the stretch, and the waiver wire is depleted, and you're in rough shape. So injuries are so huge in this thing.
Yeah, and I think with the way that Scott's done the scoring, I mean, I've seen some of his tweets where he not necessarily agonizes over scoring settings, but he puts a lot into just the scoring settings, because he really believes in making sure that all the positions, they're valued equally. And I think he's done a great job of that, at least over the last couple of years, or last few years since I've been tracking the SFB. This is only my 2nd year doing it, but he's done an excellent job in doing that. So I would say that and understanding just the scoring itself can help you find an edge. Because some folks might go into it without even looking at the scoring. They're just excited to get into the tournament, and they'll just start drafting like they normally would and wind up with a subpar team. Whereas if you just were to look at the scoring and say, okay, hey, I might find a little bit more value if I were to draft X, type of X position, that might be some help to you as well. So real quick before we get you out of here, Leo, and also the same for you, Adam. Leo, who are, I guess, a couple of notable folks that are in your particular division for SFB8?
So Tactical Assassin is in there, and he's picking right next to me. So that's gonna be a difficult road for me to I'm gonna get sniped. I know so many times in this thing, it's not even gonna be funny. There's a lot of guys in my division that I really don't know, and I made the point of following these guys and interacting with some of them, but I really don't have any established guys in there that I really have a lot of history with. So it's a whole new experience for me with this group, whereas last year I was in with 4 or 5 guys that I had really good relationships with. So I'm really excited about my particular division, so that I can, again, like you had said, get to know these guys. But I'm going in cold turkey. I went back and actually looked to see if I could find what they did. Some of these guys were in last year and how they drafted last year, because I wanted to kind of get an idea. And there just isn't any data. I'm just running blind. So again, it's going to be a whole new experience for me with this particular group, but it's exciting.
Exactly. So Adam, what about you, man?
You caught me off guard. You got me scrolling through the timeline to get everyone, because I know I'm going to forget people. I know I've got you, Tyler Gee, Pete Laws in there, and the rest would just be going off memory. But I remember our division being stacked. I mean, we've got a pretty tough one coming up.
Yeah, at least I'm not in yours. But
you're right. You're right. The other Chris.
Yeah, but the one that I'm in, so I've got former guest. I've got Nate Powell in mine. I've got TJ Calkins in mine as well.
Oh my goodness!
So that's going to be great. I've got Joe Pano that we've already discussed. Matt Wisp from RotoViz. Who else? Justin McCaslin from the Fantasy Authority. I've got some pretty big names in mind, so I don't know how well I'm going to do this year. I'm going to be kind of sweating like my draft the whole time, so it's going to be very interesting drafting against those guys. But on the plus side, like Leo had mentioned, since I know most of these folks and we know what most of them have done, I've got some information on them, so at least have a decent understanding of like who they value, or at least like some of the how what their draft tendencies are. And for a couple of them, I know they don't have any tendencies because they're just as flexible as I can be when it comes to drafting. So I think it'll be interesting. I mean, it'll be a tough division for sure, but I'm definitely looking forward to it. So, all right, Leo, again, we'd like to say thank you for coming and sitting with us this evening. Are there any other, I guess, last remarks for some Dynasty owners before we get you out of here?
No, but the bottom line, it's kind of been the thing I've been on rinse and repeat the whole podcast is basically, make sure you're having fun. Make sure you're having a good time playing fantasy football. It shouldn't be about getting aggravated because your player didn't perform the way you wanted them to, or, you want to make sure that there's a level of enjoyment, that you're building relationships, that you're having a good time, and that's the key, right? You don't want to do this, there's no enjoyment in it. So try not to get too worked up. I've got some friends that play this that get so worked up during the season, and I'm like, you guys can't even enjoy this. Just life is too short. It's all about relationships, and make sure that you're putting in the effort, you're trying, and you're just being a good dude all the way around, or a good lady, depending on who's listening, right? Because there's some really talented ladies that are playing in this industry now too. But just be a good dude, and just like I said, enjoy it, and don't take yourself too seriously, and get out there and build your brand, right? If that's what you're trying to do, like with you guys with the podcast, keep it up. You guys are doing a great job, and just keep building the brand. And just remember, everything you do adds to that legacy.
Absolutely. And again, thanks again for your time. And I guess with your legacy with the notebook, I mean, I think it's something that I know you'll continue to build, and we'll continue to do the same here with this podcast. So, Adam, man, so what you got going on besides that ridiculous hat? Otherwise, man, so what you got going on?
So to touch on the Rick and Morty division, I do have it pulled up. The two that I know is Tyler from F3 Pod. We have Pete Lawrence from DLF. And then I just found out Fantasy ADHD is also in our division. So this one's going to be tough.
Yeah. Good.
So anyways, Fantasy Cares is to bring about appreciation, and it's going to bring a lot of appreciation on Christmas Day, about $20,000 and counting worth of appreciation. And what I just want to throw out there, I mean, you got that glowing appreciation for Leo from Leo for Scott. And if you enjoy this podcast, you're listening on Scott's server. Now, I've talked to Scott for a couple years because he was fantasy buddies with my brother, but he in no way needed to pick us up and put us on a server, especially two guys that have never done a podcast before. And we put a lot of work into this podcast, and partly because I was just so ecstatic that he would be willing to pick us up and put us on his server. So we really appreciate Scott a lot, and you guys should too. He put a great event together for us. But back on the podcast note, you can follow us at Dynasty Manual on Twitter. You can follow me at DHH_Adam. We'll see how the YouTube thing went, and we'll create our own server if that ends up happening. But we really appreciate you guys listening. 12 episodes in, and it's been a lot of fun.
Yeah, without a doubt. And I forgot, since we're on YouTube, I can show everybody. So I got my SFB8 T-shirt. I'm sporting that tonight. So I figured I should have had it. It came in actually the day I left for Seattle, like before we left on vacation. So I had to rep it this evening, especially since we're on YouTube Live. So again, for Adam, for the great Leo, I'm Chris Allen, your host. I'm on Twitter at Chris Allen FFWX. We thank you guys so much again for coming out and joining us this evening, or for listening to the podcast in general. And we'll catch you guys next week.